In the Baroque period, which is around 1600 to 1750, we first off see a movement away from overly ornate polyphony at the end, from the end of the Renaissance period into the beginning of the Baroque period, which focuses more so on a homophonic style, which they call monody, to help create the origins, the building blocks that become opera. And then down the road, when we get to Bach and Handel and other folks, we see a refinement of this polyphonic idea start to seep back into the music, but it's more controlled, more refined, as I said, and it helps it push along the melody, the harmony, the rhythm, kind of following these rules that they've created to make sense of the style. So it's not just happening, like we had in the Renaissance period. So with Baroque art, just in general, the first thing you probably think of is an overly ornate, elaborate, decorated style where every single corner of a painting, a sculpture, architecture, what have you, is filled with some kind of some kind of decoration, some kind of ornament, in the case of music. And so that's the basis of what we start with here in the Baroque period. The term Baroque, interestingly, comes from the term Barocco from Portuguese, which means an irregularly shaped pearl that was used in jewelry or decoration. It comes to have a negative connotation in terms of art, music, etc., meaning that it's excessive, extravagant, some kind of distortion going on just because there's so much decoration. But again, it's overly ornate, it's very kind of bold, overwhelming, grand style to it. Extravagant is another good word to think of. During this time period, you had the artists such as Rembrandt and Vermeer doing their thing, filling in all the spaces, and that general idea right there, filling the space, is kind of a cornerstone to Baroque art. And we'll hear that in music where the music just keeps going. There's no big stops until you get to the end. So you have Vermeer and Rembrandt in the terms of art and painting. In the terms of science, this is the time of Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton, the beginnings of the modern scientific method that we still use today. And it was a time of the 30 Years' War and Louis XIV and the absolute monarch, stuff of that nature. Some of the origins of the Baroque style started in Italy as a post-Counter-Reformation way of trying to entice followers back into the fold of the church. For instance, St. Mark's Basilica in Rome, overly ornate decoration in every single corner. There's scrolls and everything at the end of columns, but very grandiose, big, just over the top kind of feel and sound to it. So again, in thinking of Baroque art, first you want to think of kind of filling the space. How does that associate to music? And the other thing that was a very big idea in terms of music and also art is what's called the doctrine of affections, which is a theory that was put forth that one single mood should fill the work, whether it's, again, a painting, a sculpture, music. So you have one single mood, one single feeling being expressed in every single song. It doesn't change in the middle, going from happy to sad or confused. It's one idea all the way throughout. It also, as you get further into the idea, this doctrine, specific keys, specific sounds that we hear, that we play, are meant to denote specific emotions. And this helps create a unity of the mood throughout as we move through the pieces. The only place there's a little more liberty with the doctrine of affections might be in vocal music, because just like chant or some of the earlier music we heard, vocal music is really focused on pushing forward the meaning of the text. So the melodies, etc., they follow the expressive nature of the text, which in the poetry of say, secular music could go from a sad love song to some happy remembrance of some sort, something like that. But overall, outside of that, especially in instrumental music, there's this continuity of a mood throughout, and very specific styles of chords and accompaniment to help express that one single meaning in the song. So some of the characteristics that are very popular, very strongly used in Baroque music. First off, as I mentioned, with some of the counterpoint, as polyphony comes back into play into the fold in later Baroque music, it's really focused on using a strong harmony. So the idea of chords are being very, very highly present and preserved in the nature of these different melodic lines. And this stems from the beginnings of the Baroque period, where I mentioned homophony came into play with the beginnings of opera. And so you had a single melody with all this accompaniment behind it, and people saw and heard that, ooh, this works really well to push for the main aspect of the music. So as polyphony started seeping back into the music, they wanted to keep that strong structure of the harmony happening. And so first and foremost, they created and used what's called a basso continuo, which we'll often just refer to as the continuo, which is basically a solid, steady bass line that's happening throughout a piece of music that, just like modern music, like hip hop, rock, whatever, there's a strong bass line that just kind of thumps along and really drives the piece forward, helps insinuate the chord motion and the chord progression, the sequences of sound as we go along there. So very, very strong nature towards that continuum. It's going to be ever present as we see and hear music in the Baroque period. And then above that, you have your main melody and whatever counterpoint filling in those middle voices there. And in doing this, the strong push and concentration on a chord progression or chord sequence, we start seeing the development of what we know as major and minor keys, which to us in the modern classical world, even popular world of music, it's the basis of how we hear sound. It's either major, the happy sound, or the minor, kind of darker, foreboding sound as we think of it nowadays. So moving on to the melodies, in the early Baroque period, we saw the development of monody, and this is again in connection with the origins of opera. And monody is just a strong solo singer with some accompaniment behind them. So it's kind of one of our first aspects and first examples of homophony. It's very specific to this time period. Mono meaning one sound, one melody in front. And in the terms of the shape and the ideas of the melodies, they're, instead of being overly repetitious like a folk song or a pop song might be, where you have the verse idea reoccurring and then the chorus idea reoccurring, melodies in the Baroque period were usually more of an expanding nature, where you'd start off in one point and they keep unfolding in new variations towards the end goal of the piece, until you get to that nice strong cadence conclusion of everything. And this, of course, brings into being a nice strong regular melody and rhythm more so. With that rhythm there, it's going to be a little bit more persistent, just a regular beat, a regular pulse, regular motivic idea all the way through, again, creating that idea like I was talking about before, filling the space in music. So it's just this constant propulsive motion of music from beginning to end, no very strong spaces or breaks in the music, rests as we would call them. But it had a strong repetitious factor. It had strong repetition in the nature of the rhythm that helped kind of create that extra connection. So as the melody is unfolding and going in different directions, you have that steady quality, that steady idea of the rhythm sitting there to help kind of connect things for you. And on top of that, really cool bass line, the continuum that we're talking about, it gives a nice strong bass foundation for us as we go along. In the terms of texture, the Baroque period started off very homophonic, partly as a response to the overusage of polyphony at the end of the Renaissance period, but also in the development of opera. And they realized that one single primary melody with an accompaniment behind that really pushed forward the meaning, the understanding, the enjoyment of the song, where too much polyphony going in every which way over top of each other, they're imitating ideas, got confusing really quick after a while. So composers jumped away from that. They were more homophonic compositions in nature until you get to the end of the Baroque period, where especially Bach started playing with that polyphonic idea in a more restrained nature and using the continuo, the bass line, and the upward harmony to create a nice, strong, thick, elaborate, dense polyphony that made sense, but it was very intriguing, and it could be confusing at times when he gets into fugues and such, but it's very, very strongly refined nature of counterpoint, these rules of counterpoint that we as musicians use to write voice leading nowadays. Dynamics during this time period weren't written in the score. It was assumed that the performer knew from the natural shape of the line, similar to Gregorian chant, where the dynamics would fall, whether it would be loud or soft. But also it has to do with the limitation of the instruments during the time period. Harpsichord, for instance, was probably the most popular keyboard instrument of the time, and it really has two volumes. It's either loud or it's soft. So we, as musicians during this time period, use what we call terraced dynamics, where like a terraced staircase, if one phrase was piano, it stayed piano all the way through. And this kind of connects back to that doctrine of the affections, keeping that similar mood idea that I was talking about before. But it stays soft, and then the next phrase could move to a louder dynamic, have its go up there, and then move back and forth. So you had this more back and forth between loud and soft, not these big, strong crescendos and decrescendos that we see in modern music. And again, part of that is due to the limitation of the technology of the instruments at the time. Form-wise, we start getting introduced to some of these bigger forms of music that become standards of the performance medium for us. For instance, in the terms of instrumental music, we see the birth of the concerto grosso, the ritornello form, and the beginnings of what we know of as sonata form. During this time, a sonata was just meant as an instrumental work. As we'll see in the classical period, sonata form is a very specific kind of structure of a piece. In the world of vocal music, we saw the origins of opera, and that gave birth to the oratorio and the cantata, and then also a form called the passion as well. And we'll talk about those more specifically as we go on here.